Are you looking for a sleeping bag, but you're confused by all the numbers? Today I'll go over what those numbers mean. Sleeping outdoors starts with your shelter choice. There are basically 4 choices for a 3-season hiker like myself. There's a tent, trailside shelters where they're available, a backpacking hammock, or sleeping out in the open. A sleeping bag is only part of the story. There's also sleeping pads and for some, camp pillows. There is some, but very little heat retention within a tent. Depending on the tent as a major factor in keeping me warm has been disappointing. There's just too much airflow. The main heat loss from just sleeping in the tent is conductive loss through the ground and convective loss through the air. Heat flows from warmer to colder objects in contact until equilibrium is reached. If you were to sleep directly on cold ground, you're up against something too big for your body to match. Your body temperature will drop while the ground won't heat up in any meaningful way. That's conductive heat loss. With convection, a thin layer of air around an object is heated. Airflow moves that heat away, replacing it with unheated air, and the cycle continues. This is why we need a sleep system to address the heat loss compatible with what our shelter is providing us. In a hammock, for example, convection is the bigger issue. The thin hammock material, it doesn't stop conduction to the outside surface of the hammock where convection takes over. This leads to cold butt syndrome. I experienced this on my first night sleeping in a hammock. I'll get into how I solved that problem later. Outdoor sleeping under the stars has the same basic issue as within a tent, but with absolutely no heat retention at all. Trailside shelters usually have bunks or wooden floors. This reduces but doesn't eliminate the conductive heat loss you'd get on the ground. Now, temperature on the ground is often colder than just a few feet up, so a shelter helps with that too. Sleeping bags are filled with insulating material, typically goose or duck down or synthetic fibers. The fill material is most effective when it can trap still air. It needs to be fluffed up as much as possible, bringing us to the first number. It's often called loft rating or fill power. In the US, it's the number of cubic inches that 1 ounce of the material fills under controlled conditions. A rating of 900 is about as high as we normally get in a commercial 3-season bag. When I heard this definition, I was surprised that 1 ounce of goose down could fill 900 cubic inches, half a cubic foot, about 520 cubic centimeters per gram. A higher number, assuming the same unit, should outperform a lower number, though to what extent, hard to determine. Be aware, downfill and metric units are not typically calibrated to single grams, and the measuring method may be different. More importantly, it doesn't translate to a temperature rating in either case. Now, fill gets the most compressed where a full body weight is on it. This is probably why some people use quilts instead of full sleeping bags. If used properly, they can be lighter than equivalent performing sleeping bags because there's no wasted down being compressed under our body weight. Now, you also lose heat by radiating it away, the same way you feel warmth from a campfire without touching it. Ordinary bag fabric mostly absorbs that radiation rather than letting it pass through immediately. It then becomes a smaller heat conduction problem as it's on its way out. This brings us to temperature ratings, broken into categories like comfort, lower limit, and extreme. Now, I show here my bag's ratings. It's a Sea to Summit Spark SP2 3-season bag. Now, I don't recommend specific brands or models, this is just what I have. Sleeping bags use standards to calculate these ratings, often either EN 13537 or ISO 23537. These standards specify the use of thermal mannequins, akin to crash test dummies with sensors and heaters on them. A test chamber is cooled to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, plus or minus 9, or 10 degrees Celsius, plus or minus 5. The heat trapped by the bag is measured by how much energy is used by the dummy to maintain its internal temperature. That number is run through a formula that estimates how a standard sleeper would fare. Though testing on actual people has shown the estimates don't always match reality. At the lower limit, a typical sleeper would be aware of the cold, but not in danger. The extreme limit is roughly the minimum a standard sleeper can survive for 6 hours before hypothermia sets in. These numbers are extrapolated from a rather benign ambient temperature, 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 Celsius is not that cold, and you are not a thermal mannequin. Some of us sleep cold, some of us sleep hot, with everything in between. But a bag rated for a lower temperature should be warmer than one rated higher, but it's no guarantee that you will find the comfort temperature to be comfortable. I suggest that before you buy Borrow or rent a sleeping bag with a specific ISO or EN rating and see how your experience compares on a cold night. You may also see other standards, but don't assume they give the same numbers. When comparing two bags, be sure they're following the same standards. EN 13537 and ISO 23537 standards, they can be treated as equivalent. Now, the down must be fully fluffed and not compressed to be most effective. My experience on the JMT, where ground temperatures hovered around freezing at night, with a down jacket, I could tolerate cold just under my bag's lower limit. I found later that my bag was not fully fluffed. Proper cleaning and drying down bags is essential for best performance. I could see daylight through the baffles because of accumulated compression of the down. Now, I've since put it through a careful cleaning and drying cycle. It's refreshed and should perform better, though I haven't camped in those conditions since then. A sleeping bag can do a pretty good job of minimizing heat loss through the air above us. The weak point is under us where the loft is compressed, or non-existent in the case of a quilt. Here's where sleeping and insulated pads come in. Sleeping pads provide two functions, insulation and comfort. Then insulated pads are a little weak on the comfort part, which is fine if you're in a hammock. On my first hammock adventure, my butt was very cold until I took a rubber insulated pad built into my pack, a 1/4 inch thick and maybe 2 feet by 3 feet when unfolded, and I put it under me. Made a world of difference. Now, I won't use the hammock again without having that pad with me. The rubber barrier was enough to slow the convection process substantially. Next, there's R value, a measure of how well something resists heat flow. For sleeping pads, like you'd use for tents, and shelters, and open ground camping, a good 3-season R value is between 2.4 and 4.5. If you're a winter camper, well, you know more about appropriate R values than I do. Look for ASTM F3340 or later revisions as the guiding test standard for establishing an R value. R values were less standardized in the past, and older pads' stated R value may be less trustworthy. Now, the final part of my sleep system is a camp pillow. It's more a personal choice to use one than anything else. I use a small blow-up pillow, and I use a cloth stuff sack as a pillowcase because my head sweats when exposed to pillow material. Some hikers just use a stuff sack filled with clothes they're carrying anyway. In a hammock, a pillow may not be necessary at all. What's important is how well you sleep. So what can you do if you're too warm rather than too cold? Well, you could try a few tricks. Sleep directly on a tent floor or ground cloth for a while, at least if the ground is cooler. Uncomfortable, to be sure, but it may cool you a bit. Obviously, sleep outside the sleeping bag on hot nights. Use the heat physics we've gone over to your advantage when you can. It's not always possible, but it's worth a try. If you're using a blow-up pad like I do, go ahead and fill it to the max, then lay on it in your normal sleeping position. Now, I move a lot in my sleep, so I use sleeping on my side for this trick. I let air out of the pad until it feels comfortable. Now, you should not be able to feel the ground at the low point, and for me, that's my hips. If you sleep consistently on your back, it's probably the butt. You might give up some R value doing this, so on a colder night, you may need to just put up with the minor discomfort of a fully inflated pad. But a lot of the times, it's a reasonable trade-off. As the night gets cooler, the air inside the pad becomes denser, which deflates it a little. You may need to add some air during the night. A hiker on the AT told me sleeping naked in a sleeping bag is better than being clothed. I question that advice. Unless you've managed to clean all the sweat and oils off your skin, you're better off wearing underclothes designated for sleeping and kept as clean and dry as possible. Otherwise, the oils and sweats will eventually accumulate inside the bag and reduce its performance. The standards, by the way, do have the crash dummy in light clothing. Good sleep helps you have a good hike the next day. Sleeping on the trail is hard enough under the best of circumstances. Your sleeping equipment shouldn't make it harder. If you appreciate this content, please like, share, subscribe, and comment on this or other topics you'd like me to cover. And if you haven't seen this video, please take a look at it now. Thanks for watching.